It is time for today's tax talk. I'm your host. I'm attorney Stephen Leahy. It is Thursday. What is it? August 4th, the year of our Lord 2022. I write the date several times a day, and I never could remember. There is some going on about the IRS and this whole Inflation Reduction Act and the doubling of the size of the IRS and all this. And the people are worried about it, as they rightly should be. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Won't you join us? Yeah, well, as I mentioned, there's lots of talk about who's going to pay this tax. They're going to spend an extra $80 billion. I think it's probably going to be more than that. And they're hoping they say it's a conservative number, is $120 billion they're going to get back. Is it really worth doubling the size and the angst of Americans and going after all of us and making criminals out of everybody? Because that's what's going to happen here. Well, you could say, well, they're already criminals. They're not paying their taxes. Have you ever seen the tax code? I'll bring it in here. I have several books. There's several books this thick. Okay, people don't know what the rules are, and often, and I would say that many businesses are, if you got down to it, probably aren't paying every dollar that they should. Remember, I think it was yesterday or the day before we talked on this show about the IRS overlooking something. For flights, for instance, right? The miles, and we're not gonna, even though technically that's supposed to be income, they've overlooked it. Well, that's kind of what they do with some other things too. Well, that's kind of hard for people to know. We're overlooked. Well, now they're not going to overlook it, right? Because they can't overlook it because they need the money, and so who is going to pay it? Americans, regular Americans, are going to pay it. Now, the commissioner from the IRS came out today and sent a letter to Congress, and that's the first thing we're going to talk about. I like my thing, promises written in sand, right? Because they ain't going to go very far. The promises ain't going very far. So that's just my opinion, obviously. So let's go to the stories. So this one's from the New York Times. The IRS says new funding won't mean more audits for middle-income Americans. If it is given an additional $80 billion, give us the $80 billion. I promise we won't do anything bad to you. The agency said the money is expected to go toward efforts to crack down on wealthy tax evaders and to modernize its technology. They already know how much is going to modernize technology, and more than half of it's going to go towards audits. They've already said that. That's how the money is being divvied. Rettig, the Internal Revenue Service Commissioner, told Congress on Thursday that the tax collection agency would not increase audits of households earning less than $400,000 if it was given the additional $80 billion that lawmakers were considering in a proposed climate and tax legislation package. That's the Inflation Reduction Act, which I don't think will not reduce inflation. Okay, if part of our problems with inflation is government spending, and we're going to spend more, that doesn't make any sense, does it? But here it is. Give us the money. We need the money. We promise we won't do anything bad for you. It'll only go after rich people. There's not enough money in the rich people, and they have attorneys and accountants who cover them. They know those two big, thick books that I told you about. They have people who know that stuff better than the IRS, or as good. Not everybody in the IRS understands the code. Let's just be honest about it. Providing more funding for the IRS has been a top priority in the Biden administration and has emerged as a key way to finance some of the policies that Democrats are proposing without raising individual tax rates. But they're still raising taxes. The addition. That's why he's saying this, because people are starting to get up in arms about this. Wait a minute. We're going to double the size of the IRS. We're going to let them start auditing everybody. Oh, but that's why they got to come out. Well, we'll do it, but we promise we won't come after you. The additional funding is expected to go toward hiring more enforcement agents to crack down on wealthy tax evaders and corporations and to modernize the agency's antiquated technology. Because the $10 billion a year or more that we give now, it's $14 billion. That's not enough for the technology. They just carved out another several billion for technology. These resources are absolutely not about increasing audit scrutiny on small businesses or middle-income Americans, the commissioner said. As we have been planning, our investment on these enforcement resources is designed around Treasury's directive that audit rates will not rise relative to recent years for households making under $400,000. We won't audit you. That commitment, for whatever it's worth, is in keeping with President Biden's promise not to raise taxes on middle-income Americans. I think that's already been violated, hasn't it? The commissioner added that better technology and customer service at the IRS would make honest taxpayers less likely to be audited. It'll be less likely. Give us the money, it's less likely you're going to be audited, not more. Well, isn't that money for auditing? Yeah, but not for you. We don't want to go after you. We're going to go after the other guy. The IRS funding is projected to raise $124 billion in additional tax revenue over the next decade. Treasury Department officials. So we're going to double the size of the IRS, spend $80 billion, and we're going to get $40 billion over the next 10 years. What's that, $4 billion a year? How much did they send to Ukraine? How much are they just spending on this Inflation Reduction Act? It's like $1 trillion. And they're talking about saving $4 billion a year. And that's why we're going to double the size of the IRS. How about we just don't send that money to the Ukraine? Wouldn't that be better use of our money? Wouldn't our Americans be better protected? I think they would. Treasury Department officials believe the estimate is overly conservative. Oh, we'll get more than that. We promise. And that an agency with more robust audit abilities will deter tax cheats. Well, if we're cruel to people and they're afraid of us, there'll be more compliance. They'll pay more. Democrats are, and this is what our government should make their citizens afraid, because that makes sense. Democrats are expected to consider the additional funding as part of a new package, the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes raising taxes on corporations and lowering prescription drug costs, among other provisions. The overall package has garnered stiff opposition from Republicans and would need every Senate Democrat to support it in order to pass. Among the provisions that Republicans oppose in the IRS funding, Republicans have a long history of trying to starve the IRS of funds and have complained for years that it has been used as a political weapon and unfairly targets conservatives. So why wouldn't they want to defund it? Isn't that why they want to defund the police? Because they think their constituents are being unfairly treated? The agency's scrutiny has crossed party lines, according to the IRS Inspector General, but it came from, and this is just too convenient, isn't it? But it came under fire again last month after the New York Times reported that James Comey and McCabe, both perceived enemies of former President Trump, faced rare exhaustive audits, except for one of those audits was after Trump left office. How can that be? The IRS said that Mr. Rettig had not been involved in the audits. Excuse me. In assailing the proposed legislation, the Republican National Committee claimed this week that an army of 87,000 IRS agents would disproportionately target poorer Americans. The commissioner, whose term expires later this year, and he's fighting for his job, insisted on Thursday that those suggestions were unfounded. It's unfounded. We promise. Large corporate and high net worth taxpayers often engage teams of sophisticated representatives pursuing unsettled or sometimes questionable interpretations of tax law. You mean they're trying to follow the law, and if it's gray, you don't want them to do that? Of course, that's how you determine what the law is, isn't it? He said, the integrity and fairness of our tax administrative system relies on the ability of our agency to maintain a strong, visible, robust enforcement presence directed to these and other similarly situated non-compliant taxpayers. Actually, they're compliant, right? Here, they're compliant. interpreting laws you don't like them to be. That's why we have a tax court, because then you go to tax court, and oftentimes the IRS loses that tax court. How can that be? But it's true. So here's another story from the New York Post. 80% of the new IRS revenue will come from small businesses earning under $200,000, tax experts. So people have looked at this and said, hey, wait a minute. I know he's saying I know the commissioner's saying it's only going to be $400,000 or more, but our analysis shows it's going to be more than that. Small business owners may soon be in for a lengthy and expensive battle with the IRS, tax experts warn. A key provision in the Inflation Reduction Act, which throws in an extra $80 billion to the IRS to improve the agency's collection of underreported income, will end up targeting small business owners to pay the legislation, according to nonpartisan watchdog, the Joint Committee on Taxation. The group estimates that between 78 and 90% of the estimated additional $200 billion the IRS will collect will come from the small business. Now it's $200 billion, right? Last story was $120 billion. Now it's $200 billion. Which one is it? I'd say it's probably closer to 120 than 200. Right? Wouldn't you agree to that? Making less, will come from businesses making less than $200,000 annually. Just 4% to 9% will come from businesses making north of $500,000 a year, meaning the legislation is in sharp contrast to President Biden's longstanding claim that he wouldn't raise taxes on anyone making $400, less than $400,000. The IRS will have to target small and medium businesses because they won't fight back. Joe Hinchman, the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, told the Post, we've seen this play out before. The IRS says we're going after the rich, but when you're trying to raise that much money, the rich can only go so far. Absolutely true. In fact, going after the lower middle class can actually be more lucrative for the IRS auditors than trying to go get more money from the wealthy. The rich have lawyers and fight it. That's why the poor are easier to go after. Accordingly, tax inspectors warn that the IRS's audits will be far more painful and costly for small business owners, even for those who think they're filing their taxes correctly. Obviously, a lot of people who get audited think they didn't do anything wrong until they get the bill from the auditor. And then they find out, oh, now I got to pay all this extra money. I thought I was doing everything right. Most small businesses aren't doing anything wrong. We don't make the tax code simple, and the complicated tax code makes it difficult for small business owners to comply with all the requirements. Even if small business owners get everything right, they may still be faced with a headache, since part of the IRS expansion will involve sending out more notices and letters to businesses. For individual contractors or small businesses, an IRS letter that they owe more money and made an error on their taxes can put them underwater. Anytime you get an IRS letter, it could take months or years to get it settled. We're talking many thousands of dollars to address. Absolutely true. I see it every day. Large companies have constant reviews and lawyers going through everything. Small business, they don't have the resources to fight back in that way. The White House has dismissed claims that the bill will hurt lower and middle class Americans, instead noting that the JCT estimate doesn't take into account how much the bill will offset costs for average Americans like, don't worry, you'll pay more, but you'll get free prescriptions. Yeah, you'll pay a little bit more in tax, but you're getting stuff for free. But tax experts aren't so senile about the reality of giving the IRS more resources. The approach here is to double the IRS workforce, take the leash off, and see how much they can collect. I think they'll collect it, but it will be quite painful. I agree. Here's another story, one more story I wanted to go through, and you'll see why in just a second. As IRS prepares to double in size, it isn't the billionaires who should be worried. Now I want to point out, I often will point out the authors of these. So let me start with this author. From the U.S. is Alan. This author is Alan Rappaport in the New York Post article. It is Lydia Moynihan, and in this is the Washington Examiner. This is the Washington Examiner is written by Jake Leahy. Hey, wait a minute, Jake Leahy just happens to be my son. Jake Leahy wrote this, and it was published today. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 appears to have a good shot at being signed into law. If Senate Democrats can get Senate Sinema and to join Joe Manchin, the bill will have the necessary 50 votes to pass through the reconciliation process. Let's hope that never happens. The plan would hurt working class taxpayers and small business owners across America. The act will introduce a corporate alternative minimum tax, which will compel a 15% tax on corporate income. It will increase the taxes imposed on certain high-income earners. Finally, it will step up enforcement mechanisms within the IRS. While most people rightfully do not want to see the tax hikes during a recession, a few realize the negative impact expanded enforcement would take. The White House said it intends to make the top 1% pay for expanded government programs, but expanding IRS enforcement won't affect just the wealthy. Instead, it'll just end up hurting the middle class. The additional funding for the IRS adds up to $80 billion over the next decade, essentially doubling the size of Uncle Sam's debt collector and putting 87,000 new tax agents into action. The result will be increased audits on small businesses and middle-class taxpayers across the country. While there are over 600,000 audits annually, which disproportionately affect low-income earners. Under the new beefed-up enforcement plan, the IRS will be able to perform 1.2 million additional audits. Surely those million-plus audits won't be billionaires. We don't have that many billionaires. The massive investment in enforcement infrastructure comes at a time when even getting in contact with the IRS can seem daunting. According to the IRS itself, the agency only answered roughly 10% of the phone calls received during the previous tax year. Nor is stepped-up enforcement likely to raise the $700 billion projected. Now it's $700 billion. It was $120 billion. Then it was $200 billion, and now it's $700 billion. Nor is it likely to make billionaires break a sweat. After all, these people have the best accountants and lawyers money can buy, a luxury that lower-wage taxpayers aren't typically able to afford. High-wage W-2 employees and executives of sophisticated corporate entities usually aren't afraid of being audited. Why not? Because they have their ducks in a row. It's small business owners, sole proprietors, and contractors who are most often subject to IRS audits. Doubling the IRS's enforcement efforts will certainly raise some additional money for the federal government. It'll do so at the expense of middle-class entrepreneurs. Democrats in Washington may be preparing to celebrate what they believe will be a tax hike on the fortunate few, but Main Streeters will have to watch their backs. That's Jake Leahy. Very good article, Jake. So that's where I am on this. I think it's a travesty. We should all be up in arms about it. We should be calling our congressmen and our senators, and it's already passed the House. So, I think it's passed the House. No, it has not. It's going through the Senate. Then it will go back to the House. I've heard Nancy Pelosi saying, "Well, we could put stuff in whether Manchin likes it or not." So anyway, we should be objecting to this. Doubling the size of the IRS is not a good idea. It's not good. If you're trying to start, and of course, they don't want you to start your own business. They don't want you to be independent. They don't want you to have to seek the American dream, because the American dream is working for yourself and making a good living. And they don't want you to do that. They want you to work from one of their corporate entities that they control. And they can get your W-2 and they can take your money every week, whether you like it or not. And that's just the way it is. So thanks so much for watching here today. Tomorrow I am going to interview Attorney Molin, and we're going to do about 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So you should join us. We're going to be streaming. Let me tell you as you know, in order to get this information out, I need you to like and subscribe. We need more subscribers to get this information out. Remember, the core of all news is tax news, unless it's violent. If it bleeds, it leads. Okay, but if it's tax, it's next. Okay, so whatever. Did that rhyme? No. But remember, we need your help. So please help us do that. And if you owe the IRS money, if you haven't filed your tax return in some years, and you don't know what to do, first thing you should do, get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. Go to freeirsbook.com, freeirsbook.com. We will ask you to pay for a small shipping fee, but other than that, the book is free. There's a bunch of bonuses in it. And if you go to freeirsbook.com, I'll tell you about the bonuses. So go to freeirsbook.com, get your free copy. So thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another time. Out. Uh-oh, that's not right.